Well, hello there, and a warm welcome to St. Lucians at home and abroad. Welcome to this special discussion forum of the main opposition, United Workers' Party. My name is Shannon LeBon. I will be your moderator over the next 60 minutes. And joining me in studio today, our political leader and leader of the opposition, Member of Parliament for Miku South, the Honorable Alan Shasney. Also joining us in studio, the leader of opposition business in the upper chamber, the Senate of St. Lucia, former tourism minister, and former Member of Parliament for Ancillary Canneries, the Honourable Dominic Fady. Gentlemen, welcome.
Great to be here with you today.
Thank you very much.
The first 100-day anniversary of the current St. Lucia Labour Party government have been punctuated by failed promises, disappointment, and growing frustration, misery, and regret among the St. Lucian population, with an F for failing grade after the first 100 days. There is growing evidence that the people of St. Lucia cannot survive another 100 days like this. To begin the discussion, we start off with your assessment, gentlemen, of the performance of the government thus far.
Well, as I said, there's an old Indian proverb that says, when you talk, I listen. When you do, I learn. And so this is a great tale of that proverb. So in opposition, the Labour Party did a lot of talking. But now that they're in government, we're getting to see and to learn what they really meant. And so the greatest evidence of the failure and the deceit of the Labour Party is what's happened in COVID. So when you think of it, that in 18 months under our administration, and not knowing what COVID is, not having the benefit of vaccination, and having to use protocols to remedy the situation, we were able in 18 months to see 83 deaths, sadly, and 5,300 infections. In 100 days, the Labour Party has had almost 188 deaths and 7,300 cases. So it means that for the first 100 days, we've seen 2 people die a day. And that is a direct result of what they said in opposition and what they've attempted to do in government. The idea of a curfew is not invented by the United Workers' Party. A curfew is a tool that has been used universally to counter pandemics like the one we have. So New York City, Europe, all the Caribbean have used curfews. It is accepted that a curfew is an infringement on people's civil liberties. And so in almost all the countries around the world, to legally do that requires a state of emergency. And the purpose of a state of emergency is to frame the process in which you're going to take away a person's civil liberty. So the Constitution took into account that there would be a need under certain circumstances to infringe on people's civil liberties. And to do so, it requires a state of emergency. So that whatever infringement you're going to do and whatever legal instrument you're going to create only stays in existence for the period of the state of emergency. And it also requires the government to be accountable to Parliament, both to approve the law and to give a report on the impact of the law and how it was utilized. So there's that level of accountability. To change the name from curfew to confinement and to try to use the COVID Act, of which we were the architects of the COVID Act. And the COVID Act was an amalgamation of the Health Act and the Quarantine Act. And what it did, it allowed us to modernize it. Because 50, 60 years ago, you would not have envisaged having to use an armband to monitor people. And certainly travel would not have been as extensive. So it had to be modernized to take into consideration these new technologies. We said that the COVID Act could do everything except it could not impose a curfew. Prime Minister Rowley, in an interview that he just did recently, when he was asked, he said that Trinidad was going to terminate the state of emergency at the end of November, and he was asked the question, what about the curfew? And he said very clearly, you cannot have a curfew without a state of emergency. So this is a great example, one, of a government that is prepared to be in breach of the rule of law, to disrespect the need for them to be accountable to everyone. The results of the protocols they've put in place, in which they try to say that there should not be two St. Lucias, and guess what we're back to? We're back to two St. Lucias. Because in order to have a successful tourism project, and Dominic can speak more specifically on that, that you had to create a bubble. Because people are not going to travel to St. Lucia under the wrong circumstances. And the reality is what we have to do is to create a protocol that allowed persons to still vacation, but it protected the people, the lives of the people. And it helped ensure people's livelihoods. The government did not have the resources to continue to pay income support for the 11,000 people directly employed in the industry. We don't have the money to be able to support the businesses that would have lost millions of dollars. And so we were able to find, unlike everybody else, a model. And the Labour Party used people's emotions to say that that was wrong. And they now have found themselves full circle of actually having to adopt literally everything that was said. We're back to a curfew. They want to call it confinement. But we did it under the purviews of a state of emergency, so there was accountability. They have not done that.
I want us to spend some time a little later to go into depth into the real infringement on the human rights of our citizens and the illegality of what currently exists, because you have no legal backing for the enforcement of the current confinement or curfew, whatever is written in the current day law. But let's get from Senator Fede, your assessment.
I mean, straight off the bat, total disaster. This has to be one of the worst 100 days a government has started its tenure in history. And then when we think of the lack of confidence, the lack of strategy, up to now, the Minister of Finance and the leader of the government cannot tell the country how is he going to create additional jobs, how is he going to grow the economy to try to continue the economic recovery that the United Workers' Party has started. We see a lack of communication with the citizens. After the famous interview of waiting on the science, he's gone in hiding. We see representation overseas at COP. It was an absolute disaster. When you compare him with other leaders around the Caribbean, it's really night and day. And we have really seen in our country there's a leadership vacuum on a range of issues. And the SLP, they have no moral integrity or consistency on any of them. And so I want to support the political leader's point. I have never seen so much flip-flopping. Not so long ago, it was okay to keep the borders open. We were told it was the tourists that were bringing the COVID to St. Lucia. The people of St. Lucia were made to believe that there was endless money, that they can get this money. We saw that when it came to 1,005 promise made by the Prime Minister on the market steps, he went to Andre Paul's show and said vehemently, without a doubt, that he did not promise anybody 1.5. In fact, he challenged Andre to find the tape. And then just within 24 hours, the tape surfaced that here he is saying that the $500 wasn't sufficient. He said that the Labour Party administration would have tripled the income support that we were giving to bars. And guess what? There are 3,000 bars that are closed, that were closed. Big businesses like supermarkets and gas stations were allowed to sell alcohol beverages, but yet there was no income support to be able to give them. Now, I believe one of the reasons they've gone to remove the board from making the decision on the CIP money yesterday is because they have no money, and then they want to give everyone a good Christmas. And so what do? They go and they break the padlock on the CIP.
They pillage.
That's correct. And they have a history of pillaging monies and the resources of this country. They were saying when they came in, they met an empty treasury. How much do they have in the CIP fund now? About $40 million that they can just go and spend. And you're going to see for Christmas now, they're going to be spending all kinds of monies that we left in the event of a wet day. But not only that, but to make strategic investments to buttress economic growth for our country. So this has been a total disaster. a lot of people you talk to, they feel extremely hopeless. They feel the country is rudderless. They don't know where the country is going. We're in a standstill. A number of projects are stopped for political retribution, nothing else, so that they can just falsely and without any evidence accuse people of corruption. But one of the things you must always note, Shannon, about this administration, whenever they make accusations, they would never do it in the open media. They always do it in the parliament, where they're protected from libel and where they're protected from slander. I challenge them now, come in the open media and make the allegations that you're making about former UWP ministers. And so it's all a bluff. It's been 100 days of deceit and misery. And so I'm really, really concerned about the future prospects of the country.
Right. And you're absolutely correct. The promises made do not match the actions since coming into office, and the $1,500 stands out. You were told that the $500 is not enough, and the people of St. Lucia still remember the promise 100 days later.
And you know, and the $500, let's remember, came from the NIC. And it came out of creative thinking. So basically the NIC pension fund comes to an end in 2050. So we asked the question, if it ended in 2049, how much money would be remaining? And it was $100 million. So that is where the money came from to pay for it. It's not even to say it came from the government coffers. You know, the reality is that pre-COVID, we had built up the revenue of the government to about $110 million a month. And the operating cost of government, it was about $100 million. Now, when we first came into government in 2016, the revenue was $80 million. So it means the government was running a deficit of almost $20 million a month. And they had been doing that for almost 15 years. So that's why the debt financing went from $33 million to $170 million in interest payments. So you start off with $44 million for salaries, $30 million for debt financing, and $30 million for government operations. And then because of COVID, the revenue went from $110 million to $60 million, right? So there was a loss of $50 million a month. Plus, your operating costs went up by another $30 million. $15 million a month to the respiratory center, the quarantine hotels, the isolation areas, the extra overtimes that it was taking, all the oxygen, the medication that we were putting in place. All of those things cost money. And the silent killer was the bonds. The redemption of bonds is not a budgeted item. So we had $900 million worth of bonds coming due, and because of COVID, people wanted their money. So 25% of the people redeemed their bonds. So that was over $200 million the government had to find in cash to pay them out. Now, when you don't pay a bond back, it's considered a default, and it triggers a whole set of problems, right? So the government was struggling, and is still struggling. And we were honest. I said the government is broke, and COVID has only made the matter worse. Now, when people were saying, oh, but you're doing roads and all these things, the roads came out of monies that was created by the loan that we had from the Taiwanese. It was a 5-year moratorium. So we were collecting the gas tax, and that is the money that was used to build the roads. If we used it only based on the revenue we were earning, it would have been $16 million. But if you get the contractors to borrow the money, which they did, it became $120 million. And we did that because we said, okay, we can create jobs. It became the largest economic stimulus that we'd ever done. And more importantly, at the end of it, you have something to show. So you're fixing up the infrastructure and improving the quality of lives for people. I mean, you were working in the ministry, so you saw it firsthand. The Labour Party went out and falsely accused the government of doing it, not to help the people, but because we were corrupt.
Now, these same road developments are in the 100-day achievements.
Yes.
In Piat Graniver and elsewhere.
The Wi-Fis that we created, the e-learning books that they criticized, now they're celebrating that they're able to get them out. Okay? the loans that we had negotiated, the grant funds that we had negotiated, the big one really being the change in the US who had never allowed farm workers. And we were able to go and negotiate with the US to get that program done. But meanwhile, I mean, I get so confused. How can the same government celebrate that the US helped them with that and then turn around and call the US mongrels?
Yeah, but to go back to those roads, what is happening in this country right now is very unfortunate. You see that the Ministry of Infrastructure appears to be very selective in which contractors' projects they end. And you look around, this is a small society, those contractors that appear to be well-known supporters or sympathizers of the regime,
That were
those
given contracts
by us, right? Those contractors, their projects are unhindered. Look around, go around, and you see which company name is on the excavators and equipment that are working on various projects that we have started. Now, meanwhile, you have a lot of small people who have gotten CDP contracts. I mean, just last night I was talking to a gentleman from Mondaw in my former constituency I represented. And he has finished his project about 6 months now and is unable to be able to do it. A few weeks ago, I spoke to a 65-year-old man from...
unable to get paid.
Unable to get paid. A 65-year-old man from Denry North, who's of pensionable age, doesn't have a pension, was given a contract to be able to help with his living expenses. And now what has happened? He's walking, leaving the valley, the Denry Valley, every day, coming to the treasury to look for his money. And this must stop. So what you're doing now is you're causing a lot of hardship on people. And the government certainly, by its politics, has really made the pain so much harder for a lot of people in such a short space of time. The level of victimization I've seen is unprecedented.
I mean, you talked about, you know, for years, the Labour Party made the allegation that we fired the nice workers. Kept on saying no. They had contracts. The contracts came to an end. We did not renew it. So here we are, in which people have contracts and the contracts are being terminated prematurely. Okay? And the Minister of Equity attempted yesterday to say to us that was not politically motivated. So I know in my own constituency that supervisors have been fired. Now I'm the rep. No attempt was made to call me to say, hey, do you want to be involved? But look, I get it. That's politics. But don't in opposition say that if you were in government that you would do it differently. And again, now you find yourself for the second time, because they did the same thing, right, in 2006 to 2011. They said, oh, they've learned, they're going to come back in 2011, 12 and make a difference. They did the same thing. Yeah. And here they are now back doing it again. The birds of a feather don't change, right? And they're all flocking together.
Yeah. So caregivers, then you have the caretakers from your former place of employ.
Those are the persons who are getting regular contracts. So our government went away from this nice program of having people temporarily go and cut grass. We gave people, right, from the same ilk, longer term contracts, right, and to put in a system to supervise it, right, so that the quality of what is being, because cleaning the side of the roads is a necessary exercise in order to maintain the quality of the road, right? So it should not be perceived as this cash cow to go and be able to give whoever you want to next week or whatever a job. And so people know that their responsibility is to clean the road. Supervisors know who's supposed to be cleaning that section of road, and there's a level of accountability. And certainly the amount of monies that they're getting is actually may not be enough to pay taxes, but it's certainly enough of a reliable income to change a person's life. So if a person already has a job and they're also getting to clean the side of the road, it complements their income. no different than a person who's working and also has a farm. People in St. Lucia have learned that I cannot depend on most instances to have one job. I have to have multiple jobs, right? And to keep the politics out of it. But here is to your point, I mean, this victimization, this blatant victimization from a party that said they wouldn't do it.
Correct. And what has happened in the ancillary council recently is criminal. Here you had someone who was acting as the clerk of the village council, and I know for sure that that person has now been asked to be demoted to a foreman, and the person who was the foreman has now come above her to be her supervisor. You have to ask yourself, where is this coming from? And then when you look at that person's file, I mean, her record is squeaky clean. She has been an exemplary worker. So what we're seeing here is a lot of people's lives are being disrupted because they exercise, or the administration deem them to be, have exercised their rights to vote for the United Workers' Party. And, you know, it's so sad, but these are this is the legacy of the Labour Party in the first 100 days, where they're going with a guillotine and they're looking to chop people's heads off.
And you and I had a discussion.
Yeah.
As egregious as that is, the most egregious part is when you juxtapose what the United Workers' Party promised in the first 100 days to what the Labour Party promised and have not delivered on. So we talked about the healthcare insurance. So you heard yesterday, they don't agree in that. So we're going to go back to a universal healthcare? What is that? You've been proclaiming for 20 years that we've had universal healthcare. So what's the difference between universal healthcare and healthcare insurance? Universal healthcare is where the state says it's going to take on the responsibility for paying for healthcare, right? Where's that money going to come from? And when you put it in the context now that you've moved into a new hospital in which the operating costs have gone up by 50 million, and you're talking about introducing a new state-of-the-art hospital in the south, the expansion of all your healthcare services. So if the government has only been able to pay salaries, but the operating costs of these facilities have been lingering, yeah? Where is the money going to come from in this guava season to pay for it? Whereas healthcare insurance is saying, if you're employed, that the same way you're making a contribution to NIC, both you and the employer will make a contribution. And similarly, that the persons who are either elderly and are on pension and cannot afford it, persons who are unemployed, and persons who are on the paupers list, that government will pay that role. So it's much easier for government to now find $40 million to contribute to that insurance. And it means now you have your card. When you go to the hospital, you don't need anybody else, right? You don't have to be begging, bake sales and everything else. Our government had promised that. Our government promised that the e-books would be sent out to the rest of the secondary school students, and that we would provide e-books for kids in grades 5 and grade 6, right? All those things had already been arranged. The government talked about the new investments that it was going to be bringing in. So instead of seeing new investments, we're seeing the existing investments being turned down. So when you juxtapose what the United Workers' Party was promising the people, the five for five, right, is what we were promising to be delivered in the first 100 days, and you juxtapose that to what we've actually gotten from the Labour Party, this is where the greatest injustice is being done. Yeah. It is heartbreaking to see us now moving back away from sustainable ideas that are fair and are non-political to now a system of political vindictiveness, a position where the government's coffers are being drained, where a sovereign fund is now becoming a slush fund, and the Labour Party continues to perpetuate the rhetoric to somehow suggest that they're above all of this, that they're benevolent and good people. It's just crazy. I mean, individuals, characters who were being questioned before, who have won their seats, rightfully so. But it is the Prime Minister's discretion whether he wants to put them into a cabinet, and if he puts them into a cabinet, what roles he's going to give them. You have an individual who's notorious to solutions, who lost his visa, Didn't lose his visa, only lose his personal visa. He lost his diplomatic visa, in which letters came out and explained why he lost the visa. So there's an infamous letter where his daughter had written to the U.S. authorities in making an appeal because she's a U.S. citizen for him. And the letter explained why he lost the visa, but more importantly said it is a permanent revocation. So if in fact the Prime Minister is armed with that information, how is it that he would choose not only to give him a ministry, but to put him in his own office and offer the public no explanation? What is it, the new information that he's come about, that would satisfy everybody that he should be put in this position? You have another individual who attempted to import a vehicle that he claimed to be his. 5 years on a pre-delivery. Can't provide any of the evidence because there is no evidence, because the car was registered in the name of the state. And there's a procedure for that asset to be transferred, of which he didn't follow. But to make matters worse, that same individual, who was the architect behind giving a billionaire a diplomatic passport, opened up a joint account with that individual. So there was a joint account opened up in the name of the High Commissioner and the Ambassador. Monies put into that account. That account, permission to open up the account was never given. And monies from that account was transferred to that individual's personal account. Now, the Prime Minister is in office. All the reports that went to the Auditor General, had been to everybody, are there. What is it that he has now seen differently that would give him the confidence not only to put this individual as a minister, but to put him in very compromising positions? So the ministries he is involved in requires the highest level of ethics, the highest level of integrity, okay? And this individual, if in fact the evidence that is against him is true, which I have no doubt it is, brings into question why he's in that position. So you have a former colleague of mine who is now moved over, claiming that he was the patriot and that he was going to become independent. We all said he wasn't going to be independent. Here it is now. Within 100 days, we all know the truth. There was Coppola, and therefore he wants to show up in blue and talk about patriot, but yet he is a senior minister in that ministry. All of a sudden making all kinds of allegations without understanding that in essence what he's doing is indicting himself. You were the minister. You have a permanent, he wants to defend a permanent secretary. A permanent secretary in our system is constitutionally protected in order to ensure his integrity. And if there's anything that a permanent secretary sees as going wrong, he has the authority to stop it. You want to come now and say that the reports were going to the PS and the PS didn't understand the reports because he didn't have a technical committee? So why didn't the PS say so? The PS had an opportunity to do that. The same changes to the Rodney Bay Road. That they want to say, oh, that the Rodney Bay Road was changed in order to benefit my father. 400 square feet, of which my father gave it to them. 400 square feet, right? But the entity that caused the roundabout to change to that location was the chief engineer. He's the one. Why? And it made sense because the Latreette Road had been redeveloped, and in the northern quadrant plan, the new East Coast Highway was due to be a filter road connecting the Latreette. So it makes sense. But don't come and now, while you were there, 5 years as the minister, you drew a salary, you had opportunities in cabinet, there was a vote of no confidence. Why didn't you use that opportunity? The night before I called elections, you were on TV, you had an opportunity to say all those things, and now we're supposed to believe, right, that you are a righteous person, that you are a morally correct person, that you now can come and make these allegations against yourself? I have no difficulty if the gentleman wanted to leave the party. That's always within our judgment. But in leaving, you cannot then turn around and try to compromise the same party you came from. If you suffered in silence, continue to suffer. Otherwise, bring out the evidence. And any evidence he brings out at this point It's compromising. And now I bring that up to say to you, this is the cast of characters that we have in cabinet. These are the same group of people that in the amendment that they made to the to the economic fund gives cabinet the authority, the catch-all. Once a project is approved by cabinet, that's it. Then the money must be lent. Well, the point is, what's the point of the board? The function said before, any project approved by cabinet that is not recurrent in nature, because you want the sovereign fund to generate wealth. Yeah? If in fact that what you really want to do is to have access to the money, and to show how farcical this is allow the money to go into the consolidated fund.
But the Labour Party has always had a history of spending UWP's money. Don't forget, 1997 when they came in, Sir John had 100 million in a sinking fund. When we took office in 2006, there was zero left. In 2011, when we lost the elections, we had collected airport development taxes amounting to 50 million. What happened by the time we came in 2016? They spent it all. They're going to do the same thing with the 40 or 50 million that's now available in the CIP. They're going to be spending monies that should be...
And the future monies.
And the future monies. And they should be having those monies so that should something go wrong. I mean, look at what is happening to our neighbors. We are this close to a hurricane. It can happen at any time. And so it's important that the way we had it is you can make very important capital investments. And this could be responding to a hurricane. And I think it's important that...
I know you want to say something, Shannon, but even what's more egregious, and I'm using that word a lot, and I apologize, but the CEO of CIP has been sent on 2 months leave, paid leave. So here's a gentleman who his qualifications is in banking, qualifications is in governance and compliance, because that's what he did for banks. That for no reason you've come in and you've taken him out. And this is a gentleman that over the last 3 years, along with the board, and I'd like to think with cabinet support, rebuilt the CIP program where it's become the exemplary program in the Caribbean. So much so that the US government did not put a note against us in their human rights report, right? And people were now using St. Lucia as the example. So when you take out the architect and the person who is managing out on the yellow areas, what message are you sending to everybody? Are we going to go back to now where we're not going to be sending files to the regional security force? Right? And what confidence is everybody going to have to know that the CIP board is not being interfered with? So you have a situation in which you have Ernest Hilaire as the minister, his very good friend Lauren Theophilus is the chairman, his very, very, very good friend Thaddeus Antoine, who is a lawyer in the CIP program, is the chairman of
St. Lucia Tourism Authority.
And then his best friend, of which is now the chairman of Invest St. Lucia, who is a banker. And they don't see any conflict. And that the same gentleman's son is now the attaché for Ernest. So here you have this party that accused my government of being friends, family, and foreigners.
I was about to say it sounds a lot like friends, family, and more friends.
No, friends, family, and cliques.
But that's your friends, family, and friends. Yeah. That's all this is. So as I say, do as I say, don't do as I do. And this is why I want to go back to the proverb. And Indians are very wise. They said, you talk, I will listen. You do, and I will learn. Talk is cheap. The easiest thing in the world is to make a promise. The most difficult thing is to deliver. And this is, you know, the disconcerting part of this whole thing was, if it had not been for COVID, but we did have COVID, the policies of our government were working. And it took us a while to be able to find our feet again with COVID. But I'd like to think that we were finding that balance between lives and livelihoods. Yeah? I certainly understand and I empathize with everybody who felt that we were taking away their civil liberties, and you wanted to have a discussion on that. And in somehow that the government was not providing to them what they thought they deserved. And you see what Canada did, you see what the US did, etc. We didn't have the money. And this same Labour government now have found themselves in the position, and rather than saying, okay, we understand now, yeah, and other than saying that we understand what tourism is now, which is a joke, right? We understand now, want to say, well, there's no money because of mismanagement. Really? Not to do with COVID? The payables of government today, $160 or $170 million. Payables before COVID, 30 million. So that means about $100 million of money is being provided to the government to fund government operations on people who have provided goods and services, right? And that's an untenable position. And instead of the government at yesterday's meeting addressing the fact that they failed policies with COVID and they're going to rectify that, and more importantly say, even before we get to the budget, price of fuel is at $81, inflation is an issue, post-COVID is going to be even more traumatic than what COVID was, and here's how we're going to handle this situation. They're sitting there patting themselves on the back on the basis that they've convinced themselves that they've done a great job. Yeah. Now, if that is the standard of what they're expecting, we're in trouble.
They've had meetings in 100 days. You've done nothing.
They went to see a healthcare center.
I mean, this is
incredible. The same Groselay police station, right? That's been there. Now, we were attempting in government to take over the Star, sold the building. Okay, so the Star, blah, blah, right? Sold the building to a private company here in St. Lucia, private individuals here in St. Lucia. And so what we wanted to do was to rent the building from the new owners, put the police station there temporarily while we break down the existing building and rebuild it back up. There was a printry. You know the state of our printry, right? Down on Jeremy Street. So the idea was, okay, we can buy this equipment, was I think $500,000, right? And move the printry company up there, because we have to demolish those buildings in town, right? No, but they'll bring the Star's name into it to suggest that there's some impropriety or some cookman that's taking place. But yet the representative from Groselay would say that he went only now to see the condition of the police. Which government has done more to improve the standards of police than our government? The same police headquarters. Now they want to go and build it?
I wanted to bring Senator Fede back in on the discussion to ask you about income support before we move on to another topic. How long can the ordinary man, the fisher folk in the constituency that you previously represented, the bus drivers, taxi drivers and small business owners, how long can they go on without some form of income support from this administration? And I want you to preface your response on the latest trend that's developing. The Castries Constituency Council is now doing the work that the small contractors in the constituencies used to do. So ahead of Christmas, 4 weeks before the festive season, the contracts to clean the communities and to ensure the drains are properly cleaned are now being done by the employees who already had jobs of the Castries City Council.
What's happening all over the world, I'll tell you quickly. I mean, the cost of containers, to bring in a container, has gone up significantly. Building materials have gone up. So COVID has really caused inflation all over the world. Now, it's affecting St. Lucia already. You go to the supermarkets, people are crying about the price of various commodities. You go to hardware stores, a sheet of plywood is now $180, for example. And so what I'm going to say to you is not very long, because it's getting harder and harder as a result of what COVID is causing globally. And then the price of oil. We had this discussion yesterday, going up from $56 in the middle of the pandemic to now about $84, $85. Now, those two are going to continue to carry up the cost of goods. And so I can tell you that the excise tax that the Labour Party promised the fishermen that they were going to give within 100 days, they can do with that. The tax refunds that they promised the people of St. Lucia, they can do with those refunds. Pay the people those monies so that people can have some spending power. I was disappointed in the VAT rebase. It's good that they're removing the VAT concessions on the barrels, but what about people who don't have Christmas barrels? at a time when household commodities are going up. So if you are going to S&S and you're going to be shopping this Christmas and nothing is coming from overseas, you're going to confront those prices. You're going to confront an increase because now the merchants are going to pass on the additional cost of shipping and clearing containers onto you, the customer. So the government must come up with a buffer very quickly to help those individuals, those bus drivers that are driving with reduced loads. I saw that the taxi drivers on television, and they were complaining about the fact that they're being bypassed. It's an age-old problem, and they must rectify these various issues very soon so that the various demographics of workers that you're talking about, that these individuals can have some relief and to achieve some more spending power, or the limited spending power that they have can at least go a little further than it is. So one of the things I'll be doing tomorrow in the Senate is to at least call on the government to go further with the Christmas concessions.
They have shortchanged St. Lucians this time around. Former Prime Minister, you were very sensitive when you announced in 2019, 2020 a 6-month period for the importation of barrels.
And a broader definition of what you can bring in.
Now it's brought down to 3 months.
Yes, and confined to toys and food.
Yeah. The economic hardships that our people face, it's expected to continue as long as COVID remains with us. We've just hit our fourth phase. Extremely frightening.
And so here's the scary part, Sharon. And again, this is the crux of the matter. Germany, which is at 67% vaccination rate, is having a massive outbreak. So the science is suggesting that the herd immunity will be achieved at 90%. We're at 20% here, right? So here they are bragging about how many people have been vaccinated, but we're in trouble. So what does 20% mean? 20% means that we are going to be continuously vulnerable and impacted by outbreaks. And every time we have a significant outbreak, what it causes for us to do is to constrain. So they have now understood, and the letter that I sent to him speaks very clearly about it. If you want to deal with COVID, it's curfews and alcohol, because those are the two things that cause the people to interact on a more frequent basis. Yeah? It's as simple as that. And every time that the outbreak comes, you have to reduce the hours of, increase the hours of curfew and reduce the consumption of alcohol, which means a lot of small businesses are going to be impacted and with no income support in sight. Right? So the purpose of maintaining some level of protocols is to create that balance so you don't have to always go these highs and these lows. Dominique is 100% correct. The global economy is getting tighter. If the government decides that it needs to get more revenue, which it does, and in typical labor fashion, increase taxes, we've seen that that actually works opposite, because now small businesses are going to close down, unemployment is going to go up, etc. Now, so it means that the remedy that's available to them is the same remedy that was being prescribed by the United Workers' Party, which they said was draconian, which they said was insensitive, which did not deal with the people. So is it that you're going to design policy based on what you think people want, or are you going to design policy on what is sustainable and going to be able to give you the ability to move forward? So when you talk about healthcare, if you don't introduce healthcare insurance, and therefore there's money to come in to help support, pay for healthcare, the current cost of healthcare will be reflected now when you go to the budget. So the budget's going to be coming out in end of February because there was a new financial act, right? So they have to do the estimates by February, and then the appropriations bill has to be done by March. As I said to some of them yesterday in the House, the budget's not complicated. It takes a minute and a half. They said, what do you mean, a minute and a half? I said, a minute and a half. I said, because once you've accepted that you have $44 million in salaries, you can't cut that. $30 million in debt financing, unless you're going to restructure your debt and go into an IMF program, can't touch that. $30 million in operating costs, your rent, gas, fuel, electricity bills, basic things to keep the government running, okay? And now your operating costs are going to go up because you have a new hospital. You have to decide what you're going to do in the south with the other hospitals. You have COVID still here, so it means you have to maintain the respiratory center. So the plan was you were supposed to close down St. Jude and save the money. St. Jude is operating at the same cost as it was when it was St. Jude, but as a respiratory hospital, and you now have OKEU. Okay? You then have a government that wants to...
You meant Victoria, sir?
Victoria. Well, I call it a respiratory center. Yeah? But you have now both Victoria running as well as you have OKEU. Okay? But remember, the budget was designed not to have Victoria or the respiratory center. So when we get to the budget, you can't hide anymore. Right? And the budget is going to require innovative thinking. And this is why we said, Shannon, and I want my fellow solutions to listen to this. The medium-term and long-term solution to the problem we have is to grow the economy. The fundamentals in growing the economy is your education program, i.e. tooling your people to better adapt to the new jobs that are coming in. And very importantly is infrastructure. If you don't build more roads, if you don't fix up the airport, if you don't improve the water, if you don't improve your ports, yeah, you can't grow. That's the fundamental thing. And you know, there's a very famous saying by John F. Kennedy in the 60s. He said, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. The philosophy behind that is that to have a great healthcare system, a great education system, and great infrastructure, you have to have a strong government. But COVID has changed things. People don't want to hear that. People want to get results now. And strong leadership is about confronting those issues with the population, telling them what the truths are, trying to work through the process to come up with the right decisions. Now that is made even more difficult when you have an opposition that is so hungry to get into government that they would play on people's emotions. People who feel, I need to get it now, rather than what the truth is. The government is not an ability to get everything now. We're going to have to make some sacrifices. There's a generation of people in this country in the 60s and early 70s that I have the greatest admiration for, who made a decision that they wanted to see the lives of not themselves but of their family improve, and worked hard, saved money to send their kids to go to school at a time when we didn't have a lot of secondary schools. Okay? And where university was not even the University of West Indies, but in England and in Canada, and made those sacrifices themselves. But we don't have that. We have young parents today who have young kids, and I admire that, but are not willing to sacrifice. They want to have the nice car, they want to have the nice phone, they want all these other assets rather than investing in their own country. And they believe that the entity that is supposed to do that for them is the government. But nobody wants to ask, where is the money going to come from? Now, these are the discussions we have to have. These are the discussions we attempted to have over the period. And I would go into my own constituency, and people want this and they want that and blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, you can't get everything. How are you going to prioritize?
But which is why, Shannon, that we never support putting the construction industry on a standstill, because the economic pain that you're referring to and trying to balance lives and livelihoods, the challenge that every government is presented with COVID, meant that you need to find a buffer. And so that's exactly what we did. We fast-tracked a number of the projects island-wide. It was the best time for us to beef up the infrastructure so that we can have medium and long-term growth. But in the short term, you're creating jobs for people. So the waiter who was laid off from the hotel industry could now find a few days in the construction industry. Someone who would have lost their job from another industry because of COVID can now find an opportunity in one of the road projects or in one of the hospital projects that we were building. Now, what has happened by making these projects on a standstill, what the St. Lucia Labour Party has done, they've made it more painful. But I think my colleague Bradley Felix said it the best, the MP for Choiseul. And he said that because we didn't discriminate who were hired and contractors were indiscriminatingly hiring people, many days you would pass and you would see workers wearing the red band supporting the Labour Party. So what they have done in the interest of politics is that they're causing pain to their own supporters. And this is the painful thing.
And the same thing with Ojo and ITEL BPO. These are private companies that had their own mechanism for hiring people. Our job as a government was to facilitate their growth, created jobs that didn't exist in the South, created jobs for young people that didn't exist. But that's what I found it very distasteful yesterday, that when it came to the Cabot project and also to the DSH project, that the Minister of Tourism and Investment was so disrespectful. And in this country, we cannot continue to build up this impression that foreign investment and foreign investors are not welcome in this country. So you even heard the Minister of Labor talking about work permits. The government does not have a plan. And we know that. They were beating pans and there was no plan. And I can tell you, Shannon, as a person who was in government in 2006, one lesson I learned. If you become a government and you don't have a plan from day one, you don't have a compass to guide you on what you're going to do, it means that if you don't have a philosophy, you're going to be in trouble. And in the first 100 days, that's exactly what I'm seeing. They have no idea where they're going. And what is going to make it worse is the conditions of COVID, the post-COVID trauma that we're about to embark on. Developed countries who are pouring trillions of dollars into their own economy are not going to be as benevolent as they have been in the past. So it means we're going to have to find a way to take advantage of their own growth for us to grow. But if you're going to settle down here in a mindset of entitlement, and that's what I saw in Parliament yesterday. Okay, we went to the Economic Fund Board and we asked them to give us $4 million to do a cleaning up program, and they said they couldn't do it because it was recurrent in nature. And so we're going to teach them a lesson, and we're going to amend the act in order that they can't make the decision anymore so we can make the decision. Really? That's not arrogance? That's not conceit? And the fact is, when you have people in government who have the capacity now, because of 15.2, to go and change any law to suit what they want to do, we're in trouble. And I can tell you, Bradley and I will articulate the people's opinions. We don't expect them to listen, because they never listen. But it would be fair to say that they were told. My colleague Dominic is going to do the same thing in the Senate. And it is ultimately the power of the People's Parliament. The 67% of the people who either voted for United Workers' Party or did not vote, their voices and their actions are the ones that are going to have to constrain this government, because we're not going to be able to constrain them in Parliament.
Okay, so let's move on to some other business. The third sitting of the Parliament of St. Lucia since the general election, your return as a political leader and officially being sworn in as a member of Parliament. The response from the ordinary man, the citizens who lined the streets of Parliament and who showed up in numbers to greet you, must have been heartwarming to you. What role do our citizens play moving forward in protecting our democracy, given that in Parliament it is 15-2 in favor of the government?
Look, first of all, I want to really thank the constituents from Micoud South. Many of them were there yesterday. I want to thank the party for helping facilitate people who wanted to come out. And so it was very heartwarming and reassuring to know that they were there. And what took place in the House only confirms how important what took place outside the House is. Because in the House, we're two. And you have a government that is so insecure that they not even want to allow the opposition to speak in an informative way. So on the economic fund, two things that happened that was just, shocking. One, that they threatened to close the debate if Bradley and I didn't speak first. That's very unconventional. The second thing that they did is the leader, Prime Minister, threatened me by saying that if in fact I decided to talk about from a sovereign fund to a slush fund and things that we felt that were improper and highlighting those issues, that he would now unleash information that somehow would embarrass me, right? And that we would be there until midnight. Now, I'm saying to the public of St. Lucia, if a political leader is prepared to make a statement like that and to threaten the leader of the opposition in Parliament, in public like that, what is happening behind the doors? What happens to anybody else who wants to have a voice of opposition in this country? Right? So it tells you that it's going to be difficult not impossible, but difficult for Bradley and I to achieve what we want to achieve in defending the people of this country. So that's why what happened outside the House is important. As we've said, 63 or 67%, 63% of the voting population either did not vote for them or did not vote. And what we want to do is to be a voice for those persons. But in order to empower our voice in the House, there has to be regular indications of that support. And so people need to participate more than they've ever done before in the politics of this country. And we need to make the People's Parliament relevant. And that relevance is by them showing up. Their relevance is in terms of supporting the talk shows. Their relevance is in supporting the social media. And if in fact we have to sign petitions, because COVID doesn't give us the ability to have a public meeting or to have a public march, right? So we have to find other ways of really showing this government that the voices matter and that the things we are saying in the House matter, so that they now become much more accountable. So a government that sees nothing wrong in being upset with how they were treated by the Economic Fund and want to immediately believe that that was politics, are prepared to use their authority, as they did yesterday, to amend the act to give them carte blanche. Right? This is a dangerous precedent. This is a government that went in breach of our own Constitution and changed it from a curfew to confinement. That's the extent they're prepared to go. And I'm appealing to St. Lucians. It cannot be business as usual. I assure you that we take the job of opposition seriously. This idea that I have not come to terms with the fact that I have lost, the following day after election, I went to work. I did that because the people of St. Lucia owe Alan Chastney nothing. What I gave, what my party gave, we gave it because we are patriots. We are persons who believe in this country. You owe me nothing. That's the process. It just means I must reflect, and the party must reflect, on why it lost and amend those ways. So we've moved on. But what we are going to do is to genuinely defend the policies of our government, hold this government accountable to the promises that they made, and to ensure that they follow the rule of law, they follow democracy, okay? And they do what's right for this country. And we will provide an opposing view, a view that is going to be informed by the 63% of the people in the People's Parliament. And I know, Dominic...
But the People's Parliament certainly spoke loudly yesterday. I mean, it was so fantastic to see how people were fired up. They came out. I couldn't find parking.
Even
because
the Labour Party.
Even the Labour Party supporters came out as well. But when I got into the chamber, it was clear to me that the members of Parliament on the government side were extremely deflated when they saw the overwhelming support that the political leader of the United Workers' Party, Honorable Alan Chastney, still has with the United Workers' Party supporters all over St. Lucia. And the party certainly stands very solidly behind him. What they've been trying to do is to blow smoke, to suggest to people that you know, his position is under some kind of threat. What we attempted to do is to give them some space to lead, because we're decent people. And I think that the decent thing to do is to allow the new government to take over, but they have squandered it. They have squandered it by their broken promises, by their deceit, by their flip-flopping. By their victimization. You don't get to take a position in opposition and then in 2 short weeks you change it. That constitutes a lie. That constitutes dishonesty. And we will make our voices heard and fight them every single way. Look at the crime situation. I mean, look at what's happening down in Viewfort. I mean, remember those words just recently that there'll be no peace in the country. The people of St. Lucia were told by the hierarchy of the St. Lucia Labour Party. And so you don't get to do that. You don't get to undermine the ability of police officers in enforcing their duties. And now you come and take a 360 degrees turnaround. And so it really is a source of much concern to me to see a lot of the stuff that's happening, and this country is rudderless. The ship is sinking very fast. And what we're trying to do is to just keep them honest so that they can at least recognize the problem, and we will stop them every time. We will continue to make our collective voices be heard, and yesterday was an example of that. What they were simply trying to do, and I found out afterwards, people sent me text messages, and I'll be very, very frank, is that they were trying to embarrass the political leader. So they lined up their supporters to come out and heckle him. But unbeknown to us, there already had people who heard that he was coming, and this was so organic. And that was the most beautiful thing for me. It was totally unprovoked. And I think it's absolutely fantastic to watch. I must thank the different groups that have organized themselves. Groups like the Flabo Train, for example. We've got people supporting the United Workers' Party in a very strong way, and all the people who are working painstakingly to make sure that the United Workers' Party is fully reorganized and it comes back stronger. We can't get any bigger than we are. We are a big party. There are 37,000 people that voted for us. And, you know, a lot of the SLP supporters are already regretting because they see the lies. I mean, there's a voice note going around in my constituency of a gentleman who supports them. And, you know, the fight has already started to who's going to get the biggest contracts. That's their matter to fight. But what I can assure you, Shannon, is that we are resolute, we are committed to the development of this country, whether in government or in opposition. I find the whole thing farcical by the speaker in his comment. I mean, the Labour Party missed the parliament. I mean, so many walkouts, so many boycotts. If there were people who missed parliament, it was the SLP in the last 5 years. And so now to see that they are now ascribing to a different standard is laughable. And I smiled when I looked at the whole thing. But we would never walk out and behave in such a manner because we are there to debate the people's issues and not to preside over dereliction of our duty, but to make sure that we show up every time.
Absolutely. And Senator, Mr. Political Leader, we must continue to connect with the people of St. Lucia. We must continue to share the message of the United Workers' Party as we continue to rebuild and refuel the machinery of this great organization to present a valuable alternative to regain the reins of government as soon as we...
Yeah, very, very well put. And I just want to say, Shanna, you know, the young people have supported this party. I think we're very proud of what we did with the creative industries. The idea that we took a jazz festival, which I started, which was an international festival, poured the money into a carnival that people said could never be the biggest event. It is the biggest event. So when I hear people talk about bringing back jazz and this and that, I thought that they would be talking about expanding carnival. I thought they'd be talking about expanding the genre creole, which is our culture, right? I was happy to hear the minister talk about village tourism and the work that's taking place. We're very proud of what's taking place in the infrastructure and bringing tourism to a level where everybody, the average person in this country, everybody can benefit. So Airbnbs, I mean, when we first came in, the Hotels Association had a strong position about taxing the Airbnb sector and everything else. I stood my ground because I said, are y'all crazy? For the first time, a man can own a home, be part of a booking system and get business? What I want to do is to fix, what we want to do is to fix up the environment so that when those tourists come, that they're happy and they're going to come back again and again and again. So there are many policies that our government started, believed by, and we will continue to defend those policies, to articulate those policies. And I'm hoping to Dominic's point that people will see through the deceit, the lack of any genuine effort on the Labour Party. And the fact is they do not have a plan. And they have a cast of characters who don't even share the same values. They have a leader who's not willing to stand up and to say the difference between right and wrong. And we're going to see what's going to happen. I don't think it's going to be successful, but the reality is that they have a 5-year term. We have to bunker down and hold them as accountable as much as we possibly can. And I think Dominic has articulated that. And yesterday was a very strong statement that the People's Parliament does exist, that people are going to take the governance of their country much more seriously than they have in the past. And I'm looking forward to making sure that we can hold this government accountable. And most importantly, it's not about scoring cheap political points. It's about supporting policies that we believe that are to the benefit of everyone. Whether it are implemented by the Labour Party or implemented by us, it matters not. We are still in a position of governance. Governance doesn't mean that you have to be sitting in the Prime Minister's seat. And we will continue to try to influence policy.
Thank you, Mr. Political Leader. Thank you, Senator Fede, for being here with us today. Or next time, there's so much more to discuss. Maybe we'll discuss the government's inability to manage the crime situation, the biggest international blunder that has befallen us recently at COP26. So much to talk about when we next meet. We thank you for viewing. This has been a special production of the United Workers' Party. Rest assured, the United Workers' Party is alive and well. We will continue to monitor to keep the government of the day accountable. And if Philip J. Pierre and his clique cannot manage the business of the state, then they must move on and allow St. Lucia to return to good governance under the stewardship of Honorable Alan Shastney. My name is Shannon LeBon. Thank you so much for viewing and watching, and we'll see you again next time.